This program is sponsored in part by
Municipal Credit Union, serving the financial needs of our members since 1916. MCU, strong, trusted, growing.
Transit Check, saves money for commuters, lowers payroll taxes for businesses, and it's also good for the environment. With Transit Check, everyone benefits.
The Transit Managerial Benevolent Association, protecting the rights of non-represented active and retired managerial employees within the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Mike Landy, President.
Whether it's a landmark or a nightlight, Con Edison knows everything that depends on power matters to someone, so everything matters to us. Con Edison, everything matters.
Transport Workers Union Local 100, representing the 35,000 men and women who move New York. We're New York's public transit union. John Samuelson, President.
And by the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association of the City of New York, fighting for the rights of the police officers who protect New York City. Patrick J. Lynch, President.
Hello everyone and welcome to this very special edition of Transit News Magazine. I'm Mark Gross. This month is the 80th anniversary of the TWU, and to celebrate, we bring you this documentary, 80 Years of the TWU, Transport Workers Union Local 100.
During the first 30 years of the 20th century, more than 700,000 Irish fled British domination of Ireland and a failing economy.
America had long been a favorite destination for Irish immigrants. They came for jobs, but most lacked the labor skills to qualify them for jobs in most industries. The transit companies were the exception.
With a vast and insatiable need for low-cost labor, immigrants became the lifeline from which transit and other industries profited, and driving the industrial engine in New York City was its growing transit system. On October 27, 1904, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company opened the first subway line in Manhattan. In 1932, New York had three separate transit systems, the IRT, the BMT, and the independent subway system called the IND. These three made up the largest rapid transit system in America. New York City's transit systems were privately owned by industry titans of the turn of the century. The Belmonts, the Goulds, the Rockefellers, and the Morgans. At the time, they were profitable ventures for their owners. Nevertheless, the largest transit system in America was not without problems.
Despite tremendous profits, the New York transit industries were constantly plagued by corruption and the fiscal reality of World War I. By the 1930s, labor accounted for 50 to 60% of the costs to run the industry. To keep labor expenses down, employers implemented 12 to 18-hour work shifts 7 days a week. Meager wages, strict discipline was considered the norm.
The Beakies were undercover company agents who spied on workers, both on the job and off the job. They looked for infractions in the way they conducted themselves, but sometimes when, for example, there were efforts to unionize, they even followed workers off the job to their homes, tried to figure out who were the union activists, and they were part of a very strict discipline system that the private companies had, and workers just hated.
Protests, strikes, and failed attempts at unionization were common throughout the early 20th century. These attempts were often met by brute force, with police, military, and hired thugs. On November 1, 1918, a strike was called at the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company because of management's refusal to reinstate 29 workers fired due to union activities. To keep BRT train lines in service, the company recruited untrained motormen.
The Malbone Street accident, which was the worst transit disaster in New York City history, came from a strike. The motormen, which is one of the well-organized groups on the Brooklyn Rapid Transit system right after World War I, went on strike. The company decided they were going to keep the trains operating. They took non-trained workers, clerical workers, put them in the motormen's cabs, and one of them, on the very first day of the strike, coming along a tricky piece of track, going down into a tunnel, went too fast, the train came off the track, hit the side of the tunnel, and nearly 100 people were killed.
The Malbone Street wreck was the most tragic in New York mass transit history.
Employee hardships were intensified by failed attempts to unionize until 1934, when companies implemented a 10% pay cut, massive layoffs, and rushed workloads.
Organizing among transit workers started around 1933, but it was really a kind of underground movement. And both the communists and the Irish Republicans came out of movements that had traditions of operating in secrecy. And they looked back at the history and they knew that when you started to organize a union, the first thing a company did was to fire the activists. So they wanted to stay below ground, below the eyes of the company. And they picked up a kind of cellular system of organization that the IRA used. People were in small groups. They knew who was in their group, but they didn't know who was in the other groups, because if there was an infiltrator, they wanted to make sure that not everyone would be exposed. And there were no public meetings at first. In fact, at least according to legend, the founding of the union actually took place in a coffee shop near Columbus Circle in 1934. And it was, in many parts of the system, still a couple of years before they had open meetings, because they knew as soon as there was an open meeting, there'd be a company agent there, they'd be taking names, and people would potentially lose their jobs. So to deal with that problem and the fear that workers had of reprisals, the union grew up in secrecy.
A fledgling transit workers union, the TWU, was secretly conceived by a few men who belonged to the clan Na Gael, the largest revolutionary Irish group in America. It was Michael J. Quill, a member of this founding group of men, who would forever change transit history. Michael J. Quill was born on a farm in County Kerry, Ireland in 1905. As a young boy, Quill was greatly influenced by the Irish Revolt against Britain's control of Ireland. Because Quill was involved with the Irish Revolt, he was forced to leave his beloved Ireland and travel to America in 1926. In New York, he worked various jobs within the transit system. The TWU began to secretly recruit union members. By 1935, Quill began to openly agitate, setting up his soapbox during lunch hours at powerhouses and machine shops. He was a powerfully charismatic speaker, capable of stirring up passions in the crowd as well as drawing media attention. These famous meetings made him a well-known figure in the transit system. Quill was extremely popular with workers. However, management despised him.
June of 1935, there was what the union has called the famous squeegee strike. And really, what this was about, the IRT was trying to introduce a new way of cleaning the windows of the subway cars. There was a 14-inch squeegee that they tried to have the car cleaners use. The workers characterized it as a speed up of work, and 6 of the workers refused to do it. They were supported by about 70 or 80 of their co-workers, some of whom were TWU supporters. And the TWU took control, in a sense, of the situation. Those 6 workers were suspended. Among those workers whose time cards were pulled were a number of TWU organizers, and they took over the entire protest. The workers threatened to close down the Jerome Avenue barn, and then they went even further and threatened to actually shut down the entire IRT system. The issue was resolved finally when a state official intervened. The men were put back to work. And the upshot of this is it raised the visibility of the TWU, and also that the IRT, in a sense, was forced to deal, possibly even bargain, with the union at this early stage.
In August of 1935, an assault instigated by the IRT Bybekis on Quill and his colleagues at Grand Central Station led to the Unionists' arrest for inciting to riot.
This brought a very public face to what was going on in terms of organizing. It gave the TWU incredible publicity, and the charges were eventually dropped, but the TWU was able to use this to prove to workers as it organized that the union really was able to confront the authoritarian power of the IRT and confront it successfully.
Michael J. Quill quickly attained leadership in the fledgling TWU. He was not afraid to be identified as a union activist and believed in a union that united all crafts, regardless of color, race, or religion. Quill was relentless in his commitment to establishing the Transit Workers Union, and in addition to his soapboxing, spread the word about the new union by handing out flyers in front of transit shops, barns, and power facilities.
In January of 1937, there came really the defining moment for TWU in its organizing history. It really catapulted the TWU into New York labor history and really helped it expand nationally. And this was the powerhouse sit-down strike in Kent Avenue in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The powerhouse provided electricity to all of the operations of the BMT. 2 million riders took the BMT subways and trolley systems on a daily basis. 2 TWU organizers were suspended, allegedly for leaving their posts at work, but the TWU claimed that this was really for union activity. The union had decided that it would use this moment to really play its cards. Monday morning, the first shift of powerhouse workers, instead of leaving at the end of their shift at 3 p.m., stayed in, and the second shift came in. Now, the TWU had maybe about 30 union members out of about 350 that worked in that powerhouse. So 2 shifts stayed in. And then when the third shift arrived, TWU had already come in, distributed union buttons to everybody, and literally said that they were taking possession of the powerhouse.
The union then gave the BMT a short deadline to reinstate the fired workers, or the power plant's electricity would be shut off. The BMT agreed to meet to discuss the union's demand for recognition as the exclusive bargaining agent for the power plant workers. This ended the harsh treatment of transit workers in the nation's largest city.
With the success of the strike, the TWU membership increased by several thousand members in less than a year. The TWU organized the BMT subway, the 3rd Avenue Railway, the 5th Avenue Coach Company, and the Omnibus Company. And Michael J. Quill became its first president. In fact, this depot was named after him.
Between 1937, when the TWU first secured its place in the New York transit industry, and World War II, the TWU embarked on a path away from disdain towards privileges, social rights, and abundance for transit workers.
Within not that many years, their lives were really revolutionized. What did unionism mean? It meant shorter hours, it meant higher pay, it meant some system in which you had appeal in a disciplinary situation, and that was terribly important. The management couldn't just act arbitrarily. It meant vacations. Transit workers had no vacations, till the union came. So for the first time in their lives, workers could take vacations, receive pay. Some of them took longer leaves, went back home to Ireland for the first time since they emigrated. They began to get holidays. The union set up a medical plan, which allowed them to see doctors for hospitalization. They took what had been pension plans, which were really meaningless, and turned them into actual systems that meant at the end of a working life you had a retirement. You put that together, and it was just an extraordinary transformation in the life of New York City transit workers.
In 1941, TWU engaged in its first transit strike against the Fifth Avenue Coach and Omnibus Corporation. It had proposed some basic demands, including wage increases, the 8-hour day, and the company responded by takeaways. The company didn't expect that TWU would go out on strike, and it did. 5 days later was St. Patrick's Day. TWU traditionally marched in the St. Patrick's Day parade. The strikers wanted to march in the parade, and the officials said no. But hundreds of TWU marchers were able to join community groups, church groups, their own groups that had marched in the parade. The strike lasted for 12 days, and at the end, management dropped all its proposals, and TWU, in a sense, was victorious.
This victory proved that the TWU was here to stay. But the outstanding issue and the union's demand to promote black workers from porter titles to mechanics and drivers remained unresolved. Failure to mediate this issue led to the Harlem bus boycott later that year, led by Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and supported by the TWU. The 40-hour work week would also be resolved at a later strike.
By the early 50s, the TWU had won the 8-hour day in 1951 for its public sector workers, those who were employed by the city, but those in the private lines did not have the same 8-hour day. TWU was forced into a strike in 1953 in order to win the 8-hour day for its employees on the private bus lines. It was a 29-day strike.
Television networks and newsreel services got the facts on the biggest news story of the year from Michael J. Quill, TWU International President. Well, Mr. Quill, how's your turnout on the picket lines tonight?
Well, we've just established the picket line here at 54th Street and 9th Avenue, one of the main garages of the omnibus system. And the latest report from Transport Hall is that the picket lines went up on schedule in front of all garages of the 9 private bus companies at 12 midnight.
What's your big issue?
Our big issue is the question of the 40-hour week, something that's established in industry all over the United States for many years.
And how did we happen to have the strike, the pickets coming out tonight?
We had a strike because there was a breakdown in negotiations. The mayor of the city of New York, Vincent Imperatori, did not live up to his obligation to the people. And we faced the blame for this strike of 8,200 men giving service to 3.5 million people daily. We faced the blame squarely at the doorstep of Mayor Imperatori and his advisors in City Hall.
At the midnight deadline, as Quill had warned, the strike began. Buses pulled into their barns at the end of their runs. Off-duty workers from all over the city reported to their locations and signed in for strike assignments. On January 1, 1953, every bus of every privately owned bus company was off the streets. 3.5 million bus riders were forced to pack onto the subways. The strike would last for 29 days. When the strike was over, the TWU emerged victorious.
Theodore Keel was brought in as a mediator, and TWU was awarded the 8-hour day on the private lines. So this really concluded for all of its workers the gain of the 8-hour day with no loss in pay for all of its transit workers.
In 1962, the TWU was again provoked into taking action. Billionaire investor Harry Weinberg had purchased the financially dilapidated Fifth Avenue Coach Corporation.
His demand to the city was that they raise the fare. If they did not, he threatened to fire 1,500 workers and stop payment into the pension fund. TWU demanded that he pull those demands off the table. The mayor, Robert Wagner, was appalled, but Weinberg refused to take his demands off the table. And he began by firing the most senior workers for the company, 29 people who were just on the verge of retirement. TWU called a strike and refused to come back to work unless Weinberg dropped all those demands.
Mayor Wagner demanded that the state legislate a takeover of the Fifth Avenue coach lines by the Transit Authority. This led to the creation of a new authority, the Manhattan and Bronx Surface Transit Operating Authority. The ousted Weinberg still managed to profit from New York City with an estimated $18 million settlement. From its inception, Quill insisted that TWU stand up for all workers regardless of race, color, or creed.
Quill was quite a man, obviously. He's a really spirited man. He believed in the labor movement, went way beyond transit. He brought transit into another area. If you think about the great things that he was able to do and the people under him were able to do, is that I've always said to many people, even today, as things changed in the world, where black and whites, if you will, didn't work together, they didn't have anything. It was TWU who set the pattern for that in the transit system. Way ahead of the time, before others thought it was fashionable, let's get together. Quill says, we're going to get together. And he had to take on management first, and he did that, and things changed dramatically.
His commitment to fight racism led to a friendship with Dr. Martin Luther King early in King's campaign for racial equality. Despite all his successes, Quill is probably best remembered for his role in the citywide transit strike in 1966. The strike brought the transit system to a grinding halt for 12 days.
In 1966, there was a very famous and dramatic strike. The reasons, I think, were growing dissatisfaction within the union with what they thought were inadequate wages, and also a change in the leadership of the city government from Democratic Mayor Robert Wagner, who'd been there for 12 years, with whom the union sort of got along, and John Lindsay, who came in dedicated to kind of putting the unions back in their place and not keeping the system that Wagner had of close consultation with unions. And the result was an epic battle that started on the very first day John Lindsay took office, on January 1st, 1966. The strike was illegal. There's a New York state law that said public employees cannot engage in strikes. When the union leaders were taken before a judge for breaking the law, Quill very famously said to the judge that the judge could drop dead in his black robes, that Quill would rather stay in jail than call off the strike. And in fact, he was sent to jail almost immediately. He had a heart attack. It was a very serious heart attack. He was in the hospital for the rest of the strike. He died 2 weeks after the strike was settled. In the meantime, a second line of TWU leaders took over. The strike held solid, and after 12 days, Lindsay essentially capitulated and settled on terms extremely favorable to the transit workers.
On January 28, 1966, Michael J. Quill passed away. Quill's death magnified his contribution to the TWU's dramatic history. Only through his bold approach at unionization could the TWU have been successfully formed. In 1980, the New York Transit strike occurred, the first strike since 1966. All subway and bus lines in the 5 boroughs stopped for 10 days. During the strike, it is estimated that New York City lost approximately $2 million a day in taxes, plus $1 million a day in overtime expenses for city employees. The strike was resolved on April 11th, with the TWU winning monetary stipulations along with a cost of living adjustment. In 2005, TWU Local 100 negotiations for a new labor contract with the MTA began on December 20th.
2005 strike was a difficult one, not only for the membership, but for me as international president. Toussaint was talking strike, and he had issues that he brought out, that were good issues in terms of success and some hope for members. And they were talking strike. Toussaint was talking strike. But my differences at that time was that they were winning at the bargaining table. They were only steps away from a good contract, a fair contract. And for whatever reason that the then local president decided, he decided that it wasn't good enough.
Taking place during the busiest shopping week of the year, The transit strike of 2005 completely stopped all service on subways and buses. Millions of commuters, as well as the local economy, were seriously affected. On Tuesday, December 27, 2005, the Executive Board of TWU Local 100 accepted a 37-month contract offer from the MTA.
But let Chopper 4 bring us a welcome sight. This is Broadway Junction in Brooklyn. The bus depot and the buses are beginning to pull out. Commuters greatly relieved.
From its inception, the mission of the TWU has been to secure ideal working conditions, fair pay, benefits, pensions, and respect for the transit workforce.
Well, the original mission of TWU Local 100 was to represent workers on an industry-wide level in 1934, and we do that today. TWU Local 100 and the Transport Workers Union in general absolutely broke down the color barriers in the transit industry in New York City, regardless of whether you're a woman or a man. As far back as 1937, TWU Local 100 was fighting for equal pay for women transit workers, while other unions, craft unions, were busy dividing people along creed or color. TWU Local 100 believed in the idea of one workforce, and those values today still drive us. We are not a craft union, we're an industrial union. We're all part of one big family, and we advance ourselves as a whole, again, regardless of creed or color.
Today, the workforce of New York City Transit, with the assistance of the TWU, continues to be a cultural and ethnic melting pot that represents the entire population of New York City. This accomplishment is to be praised and is a direct result of the leadership of the TWU and their tireless and hard-fought efforts. That about wraps up this month's show. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, or story ideas, email us at transitnews@nyct.com. I'm Mark Gross. Thanks for riding, and thanks for watching.
This program is sponsored in part by
Municipal Credit Union, serving the financial needs of our members since 1916. MCU, strong, trusted, growing.
Transit Check saves money for commuters, lowers payroll taxes for businesses, and it's also good for the environment. With Transit Check, everyone benefits.
The Transit Managerial Benevolent Association, protecting the rights of non-represented active and retired managerial employees within the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Mike Landy, President.
Whether it's a landmark or a nightlight, Con Edison knows everything that depends on power matters to someone, so everything matters to us. Con Edison, everything matters.
Transport Workers Union Local 100, representing the 35,000 men and women who move New York. We're New York's public transit union. John Samuelson, President.
And by the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association of the City of New York, fighting for the rights of the police officers who protect New York City. Patrick J. Lynch, President.